The first thing I heard about my firing was the CEO's voice, raised and sharp, echoing through a boardroom I was no longer allowed to enter. "You fired her without telling me." According to the message that reached me later, no one answered him right away. The chief financial officer was staring at the screen at the end of the table, jaw tight, scrolling through revenue projections that had turned red faster than anyone expected. When the CEO spoke again, his tone had changed. "Do either of you understand what you just set in motion?" My new boss laughed nervously. I can picture it clearly. He always laughed when he felt cornered. "She wasn't a key player," he said. "Client-facing, sure, but replaceable. I needed to cut dead weight." That was when the chief financial officer finally looked up. "Over 70% of the company's revenue," he said slowly, "is tied to accounts she managed." Silence followed. The kind that doesn't invite argument, the kind that lands like a verdict. I wasn't there to hear any of it. I had already walked out hours earlier. My badge left on a desk, my access cut without ceremony. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I worked for that company for over a decade, long enough to know exactly how fragile confidence looks when it starts to crack." What none of them realized in that moment was that nothing had broken yet. No systems had failed, no clients had left. All that had happened was that I was gone. And without me, the structure they relied on had no one quietly holding it in place anymore. The meeting continued. I was told. Voices rose. Someone pulled up my personnel file for the first time that day. Someone else noticed the missing approvals. Someone finally asked why no one had thought to call me before things spiraled. I found out about all of this while sitting in my car, phone face down on the passenger seat, breathing through the aftershock of being called lazy by a man who had never once asked what I did. Before we continue, it's important to say this clearly. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. While inspired by real workplace dynamics and professional conflicts many people recognize, all characters, companies, and events have been crafted for storytelling purposes. By the time that meeting ended, the damage was already underway, and the reason it hurt so badly had nothing to do with anger. It had everything to do with what came next. The meeting was supposed to be a routine check-in. That was how the calendar invite described it. 15 minutes. Status update. No agenda attached. My new boss, Mark Ellison, didn't bother to sit down. He leaned against the edge of the conference table, arms crossed, eyes moving over me like he was already bored. Human resources wasn't there. Neither was my direct supervisor from the previous structure. Just Mark, a junior analyst I barely recognized, and me. "I've reviewed your output," Mark said, "and frankly, I'm not impressed." I waited. I had learned long ago that silence unsettles people who want control. "You've been here a long time," he continued. "That usually means one of two things: loyalty or stagnation." I said nothing. He smiled, the kind that looks practiced. "I think you're lazy, Evelyn, comfortable, outdated." The analyst shifted in his chair. I caught his eye for half a second before he looked down. "I don't see urgency," Mark went on. "I don't see hunger. This company needs people who move fast, not people who babysit relationships." "I manage strategic accounts," I said evenly. "That's my role." Mark waved his hand. "That's what I mean. Soft work, phone calls, lunches. Anyone can do that." I glanced at the folder on the table in front of him. It was thin, too thin. "You didn't read my file," I said. He laughed. "I didn't need to. The numbers tell me everything I need to know." There were no numbers in that folder, no performance reviews, no client retention reports, no incident logs from the years I spent stepping in when deals were about to fall apart. "I'm streamlining inefficiencies," he said. "Effective immediately. Your position is eliminated." "Is this going through human resources?" I asked. "It already has," he replied, too quickly. "Security will escort you out." I nodded. Understood. That seemed to irritate him more than anger would have. "No pushback," he said. "Nothing to say for yourself." I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked at him carefully. "Thank you for your time." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct him. I simply walked out, leaving behind the one thing he had just dismissed as unnecessary. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already vibrating. "Evelyn, it's Dana," said the voice on the line. Dana Walsh had been my primary contact at one of our oldest enterprise clients for 8 years. I just got a calendar update. It says you're no longer our account lead. That's correct, I said. I'm no longer with the company. There was a pause. Not confusion, calculation. Who's replacing you? I don't know yet. Another pause, heavier this time. We're in the middle of a renewal. I know. Dana exhaled. You're the one who kept us from walking 3 years ago, when procurement froze the budget, when legal stalled, when our board wanted out. I remember, I said. You didn't sell us anything, she continued. You told us when to wait, when to push, when to say no. That was my job. No, Dana said. That was trust. After I hung up, another call came in, then another, different names, familiar voices. None of them angry. All of them careful. Evelyn. We were told there's a new point of contact. Correct. Can we speak with you first? I'm not authorized to represent them anymore. Silence followed. Then the same sentence, repeated by 3 different people that afternoon. Then we'll pause. Years earlier, during a market downturn that never made the news, one of our largest accounts had been hours away from terminating their contract. Legal had escalated it. Sales had panicked. Leadership had argued over discounts. I flew out on my own time, sat across from their operations lead, listened while he vented, told him the truth when no one else would. We don't need a concession, I said back then. You need stability. He stayed. No press release, no internal praise. The spreadsheet updated quietly the next quarter, and my name never appeared on it. That was the work. The kind that never shows up in a thin folder on a conference table. The kind that holds everything together without asking to be seen. When I turned the key in the ignition, my phone went silent. Not because no one cared. Because the people who did were waiting. The next morning, an email from Human Resources arrived in my personal inbox. Short, polite, procedural, per company policy. It read, you are required to complete a formal transition notice for any active accounts. I forwarded it to my attorney without comment, then opened a blank draft. The wording mattered. I had spent years teaching clients that precision was not the same as aggression. I wrote slowly. This is to formally notify you that, effective immediately, I am no longer employed by the company and am no longer authorized to represent it in any capacity. I paused, then added the next line, exactly as policy required. Please direct all future correspondence to your newly assigned account lead once the company provides that information. No explanation, no commentary, no emotion. I sent the message individually, not as a group. Each client deserved that respect. The first reply came within minutes. Thank you for letting us know. Dana wrote. Who will be taking over? I don't have that information, I replied. A second message followed, from a different company. We're in the middle of a compliance review. The client said, should we proceed? That decision will need to come from your internal team, I wrote back. Once the company assigns a new contact, they can coordinate with you. An hour passed, then another. More replies arrived, the language shifting subtly each time. We'll hold for now. Let us know when things are clarified. We're comfortable waiting. No one said they were leaving. No one threatened anything. They simply stopped moving forward. Late that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. This is Trevor, the voice said. I'm stepping in on your accounts. I wasn't informed, I said. Well, I'm informed now, he replied, trying for confidence. I just need you to walk me through a few things. I can't, I said calmly. I'm no longer authorized. He hesitated. Just unofficially, I can't, I repeated. He exhaled sharply and hung up without saying goodbye. By the end of the day, my sent folder held nothing but clean handovers and polite boundaries. I had not pulled anyone away. I had not influenced a single decision. I had simply stopped standing between the company and the consequences of its own choices. I didn't hear about the stalled deals directly. I heard them secondhand. The way trouble usually travels when people don't want to admit it out loud. Did you hear Cloudbridge paused? Someone texted me late that afternoon. I didn't respond. The next morning, Dana called again. Her voice was polite, but tighter than before. We had a call with your replacement, she said. He couldn't answer basic questions. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not involved anymore. I know, she replied. That's the problem. By midday, another message came in, this one from a former colleague still inside the company. They pushed our renewal meeting, she wrote. No reason given. An hour later, a different name popped up. Evelyn. It's Marcus from finance, he said quietly. Off the record. Do you know what's going on with North Shore? No. I said, I don't. He hesitated. They delayed signing, no explanation, just said they're reassessing. Inside the company, Mark was already spinning. It's the market, he told his team. According to someone who sat in on the meeting, everyone's cautious right now. This happens. Someone asked if they should escalate to the executive level. No, Mark said. We don't panic over temporary fluctuations. Temporary fluctuations. By the end of the week, the phrase started repeating itself in different conversations. Like a script no one believed, but everyone kept reading from. Just timing, nothing structural, still confident. What they couldn't see yet was the pattern forming between the pauses. Clients weren't walking away. They weren't demanding discounts. They weren't making noise. They were waiting. And waiting doesn't show up as a loss at first. It shows up as hesitation, as meetings postponed, as signatures that don't come through when they're supposed to. That's why the first numbers didn't look like a crisis. They looked like a rounding error, a shade off, a line item no one wanted to circle yet. By the time anyone thought to ask why the red kept spreading, the answer had already left the building. I wasn't in the room when the numbers were finally put together, but I heard the exchange almost word for word afterward. Run it again, the chief financial officer said, his voice flat. Segment by account ownership. The analyst hesitated. I already did. Then run it again. When the screen refreshed, no one spoke. This can't be right, someone finally said. The chief financial officer leaned forward. Read it out loud. 70.3% of projected annual revenue, the analyst said carefully, is tied to accounts previously managed by Evelyn Carter. Across the table, legal cleared her throat. Those accounts aren't terminated, but they're all paused. No renewals finalized. No expansions approved. The chief executive officer's chair scraped sharply against the floor. Pause doesn't explain this, he said. Paused is temporary. It becomes permanent if trust erodes, legal replied. Client attrition at this scale compounds. The room shifted. The chief executive officer looked down the table. Who approved her termination? No one answered. I asked a very simple question, he said louder now. Who signed off? Mark spoke up. Too quickly. I did. It was within my authority. Show me the documentation. The chief executive officer said. Mark opened his laptop. Clicked. Paused. There wasn't time. He said, I was brought in to make decisions. You bypassed review. The chief executive officer said. You bypassed human resources escalation. You bypassed me. Mark straightened. She was underperforming, based on what the chief financial officer asked. The numbers, Mark said again. Legal shook her head. There are no performance warnings, no corrective actions, no written concerns. Nothing. The chief executive officer closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice had dropped. You fired the person responsible for the majority of this company's revenue, he said, without approval, without process, and without understanding what she actually did. No one argued with him, because by then, the truth had finally landed. 70% does not disappear overnight. It simply stops being held together. Mark called me just after noon. I recognized the number immediately. I let it ring twice before answering. Evelyn, he said. And already the edge was gone from his voice. I'm glad you picked up. I didn't know this number was still authorized to reach me, I said. He forced a laugh. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Things moved fast. Words were said. I'd like to clear the air. I'm no longer an employee. I replied. There's nothing to clear. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. We may have acted too decisively. In hindsight, I repeated, you're a valued contributor, he continued. We didn't fully appreciate the scope of your responsibilities. I waited. We're willing to revisit the decision, he said. Discuss next steps, maybe restructure your role. There's flexibility. Is this conversation documented? I asked. He hesitated. It doesn't need to be. It does, I said. His tone tightened, then softened again. Evelyn, let's not make this adversarial. The company is going through a transition. I'm not part of that transition, I said. You made that clear. People are concerned, he added. Clients, leadership. We can fix this. You can address your internal processes, I said. That's not my responsibility. A pause stretched between us. What would it take to get you back to the table, he asked. I'm not coming back to the table, I said. And I'm not negotiating over the phone. So what are you saying? I'm saying all communication goes through legal, I replied. If the company has a formal position, my attorney will review it. His patience slipped. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. No, I said calmly. I'm making it appropriate. He exhaled, sharp and frustrated. You're leaving us no choice. I didn't leave you anything, I said. You dismissed it. The line went quiet for a moment. Goodbye, Mark, I said, and ended the call before he could respond. For the first time since he fired me, I felt the balance shift. Not because I had demanded anything, but because I no longer needed to. I wasn't in the boardroom, but 3 different people told me the same story later, and none of their details conflicted. The chief financial officer went first. These projections assume no further delays, he said, tapping the screen. If pauses convert to losses, we're looking at a material impact by the end of the quarter. How material? The chief executive officer asked. Severe, the chief financial officer replied. The concentration risk is no longer theoretical. Legal spoke next. Several clients have indicated they will not proceed without continuity. They haven't breached, but they've stopped committing. The chief executive officer turned to Mark. You told me this was market noise. It is, Mark said. Temporary hesitation. We're adjusting. Adjusting how? The chief executive officer asked. We replaced underperforming personnel. Mark said. We streamlined. The chief executive officer's voice dropped. You mean Evelyn Carter? Yes, Mark said. She wasn't delivering. She lacked urgency. The room shifted. You called her lazy, the chief executive officer asked. Mark hesitated. Those were internal words. The chief financial officer spoke quietly. Her accounts represent the majority of our revenue. I know that now, Mark said. But at the time, you didn't know because you didn't ask, the chief executive officer said. He stood so fast his chair fell backward. You didn't read her file. You didn't escalate. You didn't tell me, Mark straightened. I was hired to make hard decisions. You were hired to protect this company, the chief executive officer said. He crossed the room in 2 steps and grabbed the front of Mark's jacket. And you just dismantled it. No one moved. No one spoke. The chief executive officer released him slowly, hands shaking, breath uneven. Get out, he said. Not fired. Not yet. Get out of this room. Mark left without looking back. The door closed. The silence stayed. And for the first time since I walked out, the cost of dismissing me had finally become undeniable. Mark wasn't fired after the board meeting. That surprised people. Instead, he was left exactly where he was. We need continuity. The chief executive officer told the room. According to someone who was there, you created this situation. You will manage it. That was not mercy. It was containment. By the following week, Mark's authority had been to something symbolic. Decisions that once moved with a single email now required approval from finance, legal, and the board. Meetings he used to lead were reassigned. Invitations stopped appearing on his calendar. People still greeted him in the hall. They were careful to sound neutral. No one asked his opinion anymore. A recruiter I knew called me one evening, voice lowered out of habit. Off the record, she said. What happened over there? You should ask them, I replied. She sighed. We already did. The industry is smaller than people think. Stories don't travel loudly. They move quietly, through side conversations and careful pauses. Too impulsive. Didn't understand the business. Fired the wrong person. His name began to appear with an asterisk. No one needed explained. Mark stayed. He had to. Leaving would look like an admission. Staying meant daily exposure to the consequences of his own judgment. Clients requested escalations that bypassed him entirely. Internal teams documented every decision twice. Legal insisted on written justifications where verbal authority once sufficed. Once, weeks later, he tried to join a call with one of my former accounts. The client stopped him mid-sentence. We'd prefer to wait, she said calmly. This isn't the right forum. That phrase followed him after that. Not fired, not absolved, just visible. When people talk about consequences, they imagine exits and headlines. They rarely imagine what it means to remain stripped of credibility, watched closely by the people who no longer trust you. Mark kept his title. He kept his office. He kept showing up. What he lost was the one thing no company can restore once it's gone. Belief. I didn't announce my departure to the world. I didn't post anything. I didn't explain myself. I registered a small consulting firm under my own name and returned calls at my own pace. The first client to reach out was Dana. "We're restructuring our advisory model," she said. "We want you involved." "In what capacity?" I asked. "Yours," she replied. "Independent." Others followed. Not because I asked them to. Not because I persuaded anyone. They came because the work had always been between us. Not mediated by a logo. When Mark found out, he sent one last message through legal. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't an apology. It was a notice. The company would be reviewing external partnerships. I read it once and closed the file. I met my new clients in quiet conference rooms and late calls. The conversations were different now, clearer, no performance theater. No translation layer between what needed to be done and who was responsible for doing it. One afternoon, a former colleague called. "They're still blaming market conditions," she said. "Still saying it was unavoidable." I smiled to myself. I hadn't taken any files. I hadn't taken any contexts that weren't already mine. I hadn't taken revenge or satisfaction or victory laps. What I took was my labor back. The company didn't collapse. It changed. Slower, smaller, more cautious. Mark stayed, reduced to process and oversight. His authority replaced by scrutiny. That was never my concern. I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped holding together a structure that relied on my work while dismissing my worth. And that is the lesson I carry forward. Loyalty without respect is not stability. It is unpaid labor. When you step away from systems that do not protect you, you don't create chaos. You reveal what was already fragile. I was fired by the CEO's son on the morning I turned 54. "Nora," he said, not standing, not offering a seat. "This will be quick." His name was Caleb Whitaker, same last name as mine, no relation. He flipped a folder once, like the decision inside it needed air. "We're restructuring," he continued. "Your role no longer aligns." Brooke from HR opened her mouth. He lifted a finger, she closed it. I said nothing. Caleb leaned back, effective immediately. "And put this in the notes, do not rehire." He paused. Watching my face, company-wide, Brooke whispered. "As of today, your employment is concluded. You'll return access and equipment by end of day." Caleb cut in again. "Let's not drag it out. You know how this works." I knew how it worked. I had written half the procedures they now use to end me. I opened the folder and read it all. 2 weeks severance, options voided, access revoked, a paragraph about conduct, as if I might spiral online. I signed where they pointed, initialed where they asked. Caleb blinked. "You're taking this well," he said. I looked up for the first time. "You seem proud." The room went quiet. Brooke stared at the table. Caleb cleared his throat. "No hard feelings. This isn't personal." I stood. "Good luck," I said. And I meant it the way surgeons mean it before a difficult operation. I walked out. No argument, no explanation. My badge stopped working at the door. My email froze mid-load on my phone. I didn't check again. 15 minutes later, while Caleb was still congratulating himself for cleaning house, a sequence I had designed years ago began running without my interference. I did not call anyone. I simply stopped holding a door closed. I am Nora Whitaker. I helped build this company when it was fragile enough to fail from a single mistake. I learned then that systems remember what people forget. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. Each story carries its own message and stands on its own. This one is about what happens when experience is mistaken for irrelevance, and when the paperwork no one reads decides to speak. I left the building and didn't look back. The phone in my pocket stayed silent. For now, the speed of it told me everything. Brooke followed me into the corridor, papers already stacked in her arms. "Nora, I just want you to know this wasn't my call." Her voice shook. The language came pre-approved. "Which language?" I asked. She hesitated. "The rehire restriction." I nodded. "Who drafted it?" She swallowed. "Legal sent it over before the meeting. Before, not after. Not reactive. Planned." Caleb stepped out behind her, adjusting his cuffs. "We don't need a hallway conference," he said. "It's done." Brooke glanced at him. "We usually reserve do not rehire for misconduct." Caleb didn't look at her. Consider this preventative. I met his eyes, preventing what he smiled. Thin and practiced. Disruption. Brooke shifted her weight. We didn't circulate this to the board. That's fine, Caleb said. It's operational. It affects future eligibility. She pressed. And precedent. He finally looked at her. Brooke, do you want to explain process? Or do you want to keep your job? Silence landed hard. I turned to Brooke. It's okay, I said quietly. You don't need to fix this, she whispered. I'm sorry, like it was a confession. Caleb watched the exchange with irritation. You're making this bigger than it is, he said to me. You had a title. You don't anymore. You moved fast, I replied. That usually means you were in a hurry. His jaw tightened. It means I'm decisive. Decisive people still read what they sign, I said. Legal finally appeared at the end of the hall. Martin. He didn't come closer, didn't speak. Just gave Caleb a look that said the warning had already been delivered and ignored. Caleb waved him off. We're good. Martin didn't argue. He turned and left. That was the moment it became clear. This wasn't about my performance or my age or a reshuffle. This was about removing a name from future conversations. About sealing something off before anyone remembered it existed. Caleb straightened his shoulders. You'll get your final paycheck processed within one pay cycle. I'm sure you'll handle it efficiently, I said. I walked away before he could say anything else. Behind me, no one followed. The paperwork had already done its job. Brooke slid the final page toward me. Just your initials here. I picked up the pen and initialed. No pause, no comment. Caleb leaned forward. You don't have any questions. I shook my head. That's it, he said. You're not going to push back. I turned another page. Signed. You've already decided. I said. Anything I say now would just be for your comfort. Brooke flinched. Nora, it's fine, I said, and meant it. Not because it felt fair, because fairness had nothing to do with this moment. Caleb watched my hands. You're being very calm. I'm being precise, I replied. He laughed once, sharp. You always did hide behind process. I met his eyes. Process is what keeps people from confusing speed with authority. His smile slipped, just enough to notice. You're done here. I capped the pen and slid it back. Then we agree. As I stood, I felt the familiar pull of doubt. I did not know whether the protections I once helped draft still existed in the form I remembered. I did not know how many amendments had been layered over them, or how many times someone had tried to soften their edges. Systems age, people forget, documents get refiled, renamed, ignored. Brooke lowered her voice. You don't want a copy, no, I said. I've read it, Caleb scoffed. You always thought you were irreplaceable. I never thought that, I said. I thought the work mattered. He waved toward the door. Security won't need to, I said, already turning. As I walked away, I felt it then, the shift, not triumph, not fear, attention, the kind that sharpens when someone refuses to perform the role assigned to them. Behind me, voices dropped, papers shuffled. Someone cleared their throat. I did not look back. I had learned a long time ago that silence, used correctly, makes people fill it with their own unease. Before the company had a name, Howard Whitaker called me into a borrowed office above a copy shop in Cambridge and said, "We need someone who understands how things break. Not vision, not branding, breakage. I can't promise stock options," he added, "or a salary worth bragging about. I'm not here to brag," I said. "I'm here to make sure you don't fail quietly." He smiled like he thought that was a joke. It wasn't. We sat across from each other with a legal pad between us. Howard talked about growth and momentum. I talked about audits, controls, and what happens when enthusiasm outruns governance. He kept interrupting me until I slid a draft agreement across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "My conditions." He scanned it. "You want co-founder status?" "Yes." "And voting authority conditional." He looked up. "Conditional on what?" "On someone trying to remove me without following the rules?" I said. "Or pretending rules don't matter once the company gets bigger." Howard leaned back. "That sounds like mistrust." "It's the opposite," I said. "It assumes success." He read again, slower this time. "This clause," he said, tapping the page. "It gives you control. It gives the system control." I corrected. "I don't want power. I want stability." He frowned. "Why not just use it? Because if I ever have to," I said. "Something else has already gone wrong." Howard closed the folder. You're planning for betrayal. I'm planning for memory loss, I said. Companies forget who built them. He signed without another word. We never spoke about that clause again. Not when we incorporated, not when investors came in, not when org charts replaced conversations. It sat where it belonged, quiet and precise, waiting for the day someone would decide that experience was expendable and paperwork was optional. I went back to work. The clause was never dramatic. That was the point. Wade Morrison said that once, years ago, when he was still junior compliance and I was still invited to meetings that mattered. The dangerous ones don't announce themselves, he'd said. They sit there looking boring. I remembered that when I pulled up the old agreement on my phone. The language was plain, no threats, no theatrics, just conditions, termination without proper authority, lack of documented board approval, no formal transfer of founding control. If those boxes were checked, the clause didn't punish anyone. It simply reverted operational authority to its original holder until governance was corrected. Brooke's voice echoed in my head. Legal sent it over before the meeting. That meant speed. Speed meant shortcuts. I had never sold a single share. Not when recruiters dangled buyouts. Not when finance suggested liquidity for balance. I'd smiled and declined every time. You're leaving money on the table, one of them had said. I'm leaving leverage where it belongs, I replied. That leverage only worked if my equity never dipped below the threshold. Mine hadn't. I'd tracked it quietly, year after year, watching dilution skim past me without crossing the line. Still, as I scrolled, doubt pressed in. Clauses get amended, documents get superseded. Someone could have buried it under a revision I never saw. Someone could have neutralized it and assumed I'd never check. I heard Caleb's voice again, preventative. Preventing what? Exactly. My phone buzzed. A message from Wade. No greeting. Did they really terminate you today? Yes, I typed back. A pause. Then without board sign-off. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm pulling the original filings, he wrote. No promises. I locked the screen and sat still. The clause didn't need belief. It needed accuracy. Either it still stood, or it didn't. Either the system would respond, or it wouldn't. For the first time that morning, the outcome wasn't in my hands. People like to believe that consequences arrive because someone makes a dramatic phone call, that someone storms out and dials a number that changes everything. It makes the story cleaner. It also makes it false. I didn't call anyone. Years ago, when the company finally had enough revenue to worry about regulators instead of rent, I sat in a meeting with compliance and said, if something goes wrong, I don't want permission to report it. I want obligation. Wade had looked at me then. You're talking about automated escalation. I'm talking about removing discretion, I said. Especially from people who think rules slow them down. So we built it that way. Termination at certain levels triggered reviews. Reviews checked authority. Authority checks cross-referenced incorporation documents. And if something didn't line up, the system didn't ask whether it should speak. It spoke. That morning, when Caleb signed my termination without board approval, without founder notice, without even asking legal to slow him down, the system flagged it, not loudly, precisely. An internal report was generated, then another. Ownership documentation wasn't attached as a favor to me. It was embedded because that was the only place it belonged. I was sitting with my phone face down when Wade finally called. This is moving, he said. No greeting, no apology. Because of me, I asked. Because of the process. He replied, you just stopped shielding it. I closed my eyes. Is it bad? It's accurate, he said, which is worse for them. I thought of Caleb, so sure that speed meant control, of how quickly he'd waved off legal, of how confident he'd been that no one would look backward. Wade lowered his voice. Once it clears compliance, it doesn't stay internal. I know, I said. Then you should know what comes next. I do, I replied. I designed it. I ended the call and let the phone rest in my hand, somewhere inside the company. Systems were doing exactly what they were meant to do. And this time, I wasn't stopping them. I wasn't in the room when the first questions were asked, but I knew the moment they started. Wade called me again, quieter this time. They've convened an emergency session. Who asked for it? I said. Legal, he replied. Not the board. That alone told me everything. Caleb had expected applause. Instead, He was being asked to explain himself. He's saying Howard authorized the move. Wade continued. Verbally. Verbal doesn't live anywhere, I said. That's what legal said. There was movement on the line. Papers shifting, a door closing. Wade was inside now. Caleb's voice cut through the speaker, sharp and irritated. I had discretion. My father made that clear. A woman answered him. I recognized her voice from years of filings. Linda Reyes, outside counsel. Discretion still requires documentation. You're splitting hairs, Caleb snapped. This was operational. Wade cleared his throat. The termination triggered a founder-level review. Caleb laughed. She wasn't a founder anymore. She was operations. That title came later, Wade said evenly. The agreement didn't. Silence stretched. Linda spoke again. Do you have a written delegation of authority? Caleb didn't answer. Another voice joined in. Older, measured. Caleb, this isn't about intent. It's about traceability. I signed the papers, he said. That should be enough. It isn't, Linda replied. Not at this level. Wade muted the line briefly. They're pulling the original incorporation documents. Good, I said. He hesitated. They didn't think anyone still had access. I said, when the line went live again. Caleb sounded different, quieter. You're overreacting. No, Linda said. We're catching up. Wade ended the call soon after. They're starting to understand, he said. Understanding comes after damage. I replied. I set the phone down and waited. Authority was being asked to prove itself. And proof, unlike confidence, doesn't care who your father is, Wade called once. They're here. Who I asked. He didn't hesitate. Federal investigators, financial compliance. I said nothing. They asked for the board. He continued. All of them. Now. Later, he called again. This time the line stayed open. A man spoke first. Calm. Measured. We're not here to accuse anyone. We're here to clarify authority. No one answered. Another voice followed. Female, precise. This inquiry began with an internal report generated automatically this morning. Caleb cut in. We've already explained. This was a routine termination, the man replied. Routine terminations do not trigger founder-level escalation. Silence. Paper slid across a table. I could hear it through the phone. The sound was unmistakable. We cross-referenced your termination records, the woman said, with your original incorporation filings. Someone cleared their throat. Linda. I assumed. The man continued. There is a clause here, Section 14, Subsection 2. Caleb laughed, too quickly. That's obsolete. No, the woman said. It is dormant. She read it aloud, slowly, word by word. The language I had written years ago, stripped of tone, stripped of memory, reduced to function. In the event of involuntary termination executed without documented board approval or authorized delegation, she read. Operational and voting control reverts to the original signatory until governance is restored. No one interrupted her. When she finished, the room stayed silent. Caleb spoke at last. That can't be right, the man answered. It is right. It is also active. Another pause. Linda's voice broke through. Caleb, when exactly did you receive written authority to execute this termination I didn't need? Please answer the question, the woman said. He didn't. The man closed his folder. Until this is resolved, decisions made under assumed authority are subject to review. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else shifted in their chair. Wade finally spoke. The original signatory is Nora Whitaker. The name landed heavily. No one said anything after that. My phone rang while I was sitting alone. Screen face up, volume on. I had been expecting it. Nora, Caleb said, breathless, trying to sound steady. There's been some confusion. I waited. Legal is saying the paperwork wasn't clear, he continued. Procedural misalignment. That's all this is. Misalignment requires two sides. I said, this didn't. We can fix it, he said quickly. Retroactive authorization. A clarification memo. The board is open to discussion. About what? I asked. About bringing you back. He said, temporarily, until this settles. I don't need to be brought back, I said. I'm already there. He laughed once, nervous. That's not how this works. It is today, I replied. There was a pause. Papers rustled on his end. Someone whispered something he didn't repeat. Nora, he said again, softer. This clause, if it exists, it wasn't meant to be used like this. It wasn't meant to be ignored, I said. You were operations, he insisted. You didn't run the company. I kept it from collapsing, I said. There's a difference. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? I'm not negotiating my position, I said. That part is settled. So this is about punishment, he said, trying to find his footing. This is about responsibility, I replied. You exercised authority you didn't have. The system corrected it. Another pause. Longer this time. They're asking me to step aside, he said. Just until the review is complete. That would be wise, I said. You planned this, he accused. I planned for this, I corrected. Years ago. His voice dropped. You could have warned me. I did, I said. You just didn't recognize it as a warning. The line went quiet. I ended the call without ceremony. Control had already shifted. What came next would not be decided over the phone. Security did not stop me when I returned. They checked my name, then checked again. A quiet call was made. The gate lifted. Wade met me near the elevators. Access restored, he said. Shareholder level. Good, I replied. Then we can move forward. The board session was brief, not because there was nothing to say, but because the facts no longer needed interpretation. Linda opened with a single sentence. Caleb Whitaker is suspended from all executive duties pending the outcome of the compliance review. Caleb did not argue. He did not look at me. The protection he had relied on was gone, and without it, his confidence collapsed into silence. I took the seat at the far end of the table. This isn't a takeover, I said. It's a correction. One director leaned forward. What are you proposing? Stability, I said. Interim leadership with documented authority. Independent oversight. No exceptions. And staff, another asked. No retaliation, I said. Anyone who followed process is protected. Anyone who bypassed it answers for that choice. Wade nodded. Compliance can implement immediately. Do it, I said. After the meeting, I updated the founder records. Not to elevate my name, but to anchor it where it belonged. The clause was no longer buried. It was referenced, indexed, and impossible to forget. As I stood to leave, Brooke caught up to me. I didn't think anyone would notice, she said quietly. They always do, I replied. Eventually, I walked out the same doors I had exited days earlier. The building felt no different. I did. Here is the life lesson I carried with me. Experience is not a favor you ask others to recognize. It is a record you protect. Systems outlast egos. And when they are built with care, they enforce accountability without anger. Titles can be removed. Authority must be earned and documented. And the people who build the foundation should never have to shout to prove they belong.